Well, hi everybody, and thank you to Catherine for asking me to do this. Just to explain really briefly, I was really honoured, I guess, to work with the PPNs that agreed to develop a process for developing vision statements or the community wellbeing statements, and since then have been assisting in rolling those out. So that's really where I'm coming from. And Catherine just asked me to say a little bit about, well, you know, what is this vision statement or this community wellbeing statement that we're talking about, and why is it important? So I'm going to do that as a sort of a whistle-stop tour, if you like. And I think it's helpful to think first of all about where these wellbeing visions fit in. And forgive me, we can maybe come back to it, but I will talk about them as being visions, and hopefully it'll become evident why that is in a little while. I find it helpful to think about the public participation network using this stool picture because it captures for me the three core functions, which I'm sure you're all well familiar with, that the PPNs have. So you've got there on the left information, and that's a two-way flow of information, getting information out to member groups, but also feeding it back to various agencies and other audiences that the member groups want to communicate with. The second really important function is about building capacity and essentially providing assistance and support, whatever's necessary, so that the member groups are able to become increasingly successful in all aspects of doing what they do, whatever it is that they're interested in. And the third thing is about supporting the consultation and the participation of the community and voluntary sector, whether it's with the local authority or with other agencies. And so into this context, you've got a vision or a well-being statement that sets out what it is that the member groups of the public participation network want their area to be. What would this part of the county or this local authority area, whatever it is that you're working in, what would it be like if everything in it was right and was working? And it's what they agreed together that they're aiming for, and essentially it then underpins the operation of the PPN, and that's how fundamental and important it is. But it's also one of the ways in which it can become extremely useful. So that means that you've got representatives, of which there are numerous within every PPN, on a whole range of committees, whether it's in local authorities or it might be the Drug and Alcohol Task Force or whatever other structure they're on. It means that those representatives know what they're arguing for. They know what all of the community and voluntary organisations that are part of their PPN want. So they have something at their back, and it means that all of the other PPN member groups know what those representatives are saying on their behalf. What is it the case they're making, what they're asking people to do for PPNs in general. And then lastly, it gives direction to the work that the PPN does. So if this is our overall goal and our aim, then that's going to inform the strategic plan that we have, our annual work plan, and so on. So that's how important, and that's my bit of highlighting, the vision is for PPNs when it's in place and then it's actually used. And I think for me anyway, one of the critical things here is about remembering that the PPNs around the country represent many hundreds of groups, in some cases well over 1,000 different groups from social inclusion, environment, and community and voluntary sectors. And if you think about it, that is really as wide a range of groups and interests as you've got imagination for. So it could be cycling groups, residents associations, Special Olympics, heritage groups, storytelling clubs, social enterprise, book clubs, zero waste alliances, you name it, they're there. So if you think about bringing all of them together, it's really a big challenge across all those different interests, all the different ways that they work, and their different characteristics, for them to come together and develop and agree their own shared view of how they want their area to be. And that's really the process that is developing your vision or your well-being statement. And the purpose of it is tied up with having brought everyone together, I guess. We use this concept of community well-being, which is internationally established across the PPNs, as a tool essentially to assist us in exploring all the different aspects of our lives that we need to consider and think about if we're going to be able to describe the area the way that we want to see it. Okay? If you think about the 6 different headings, and you can see them there, hopefully, health, economy and resources, social and community development, participation, democracy and good governance, values, culture and meaning, and environment and sustainability, you can see that we're trying to think about life holistically, all the different aspects that have an impact on how well, in all its senses, our lives are, and our communities are, and the areas that we live are. And essentially, communities get this, at least that's my experience. You know, they understand that if you change something in an area, let's say the transport service, for example, then it's going to have an impact on other areas of life in their area as well. So it's not news to communities that we need to think inclusively about all aspects of our lives. And these headings and this concept of community well-being is essentially a guide to help us to do this together. And in this process, we ask every member group essentially of the PPN to consider and make an input under all of those headings, not necessarily just one that they're drawn to, but across all of them, and to do it in conversation with all the other member groups. And in that way, the process is aiming really to get everyone considering and agreeing how they want things to be in a comprehensive and a joined up way. So just imagining having a conversation in a small group around this at a particular heading, you might have a choir, an invasive alien species clearance group, a community resource centre, an asylum seekers support group, you know, a very varied range of voices in a conversation. And those hugely different voices have an opportunity then to listen to one another, to take the time to appreciate the very different focus and concerns different PPN member groups have, and that need to be considered and addressed. And then they start to have a conversation about how to identify their shared goals and develop that. You know, how do the specific needs of those different groups fit together? How can everyone benefit? And that's the unique characteristic of PPNs, which is around this sort of common good, our community good. So it's an approach which is trying to build on that and strengthen that, I suppose. So I think the most important thing for me, perhaps, to stress is that this process is essentially a very simple one. I'm sure that the others who are going to talk to you, having done it, might challenge me on that one, but I'm going to stick it out and say it's quite simple. So essentially, initially, all the member groups of PPN make input to the consultation. They share those, they have an opportunity to talk about them and to agree them. And those are then used to develop draft vision texts or wellbeing statements. And those have the job of summarising all of those consultation inputs. And when they're developed, they're then circulated for consultation and for agreement. And once that's been done, then those draft visions go forward to be approved at the municipal district or at the county or city plenary level. And that's really what the process is around and involves. Interestingly, it's worth sort of saying that the consultation inputs are the basis for the vision, and they're kept. Nothing that goes on in this process is ever lost. So those are kept, and they inform a lot of the work and some of the specifics that the PPN might be working on in greater detail. So often that might be a particular issue that needs to be addressed, or it might be a suggestion for a way that issues can be solved and that the vision can be achieved. When you get to the visions themselves, and some of you may have seen some of these because those PPNs that have done them have generally got them on their website and they're available. They are quite high level documents that are summaries of what the PPN members want to see achieved. And I've just made a note there that where you have a PPN divided into municipal districts, generally they'll each have a vision and they'll be brought together under a brief overall county vision. So if you're interested in looking at further detail about this, you can check out both an explanation of the process, a description of the process, and a whole range of support materials that are available on the Community Wellbeing .ie website that's there as an open reference. Most importantly, I think I just need to say a little bit about why would you do this? Why would a PPN need to have a vision? And I guess a lot of people have said in discussions we've had about this, surely this should have been done when the PPNs were set up, and that's a valid point. If this is, you know, what we're trying to work towards, it might have been reasonable to say, well, when we get together, you know, initially we should have worked out what that was, and that's very possibly true, but we are where we are. So for a lot of PPNs, perhaps now, if you like, things have settled down, we now understand what this structure is and how it works. And this is a very good time to say, well, these are all our member groups and we're going to bring them together. And the reason we're going to bring them together, and this is probably one of the most powerful things that happens, is that the process means we get a chance to establish a shared goal and a shared direction. And that's really powerful because it means that across all those incredibly varied groups, and I've given you some examples of them, we have a chance to develop a shared sense of purpose and to start building the way that we work together and doing it in a collaborative way. And if you think about all those different groups, as I said, different sizes, different ways of working, Meals on Wheels, men's sheds, branches of Antashka and so on. The PPN, by using this approach, is really modelling the sort of consensus building approach that helps to foster and build strong and inclusive communities, and really ways that help us to keep the common good, our shared objectives, as the central focus. So I think it's very, very powerful for that reason, and it's an ongoing process, so it continues to give benefit. The second thing that I think is really important, that it's important why we have visions within PPNs, is that this is something that is entirely developed by the members and it's owned by them. So nobody rocks up with a draft and nobody says, here are some, you know, good starting ideas or anything. It really is a blank sheet exercise. And if you bring all those impressive, all that impressive number of groups together, it's quite a feat to think that they can, starting from scratch, develop a shared goal together. And it's something that then can't be, you know, sniffed at or dismissed if you're, you know, elected members, councillors, or you're the local authority staff, or indeed working with other agencies. So it's a very powerful thing, and it's a very impressive thing for PPNs to be able to produce and do it together. Okay, the third thing then is that, and I mentioned this before, it does inform the PPN reps in their role. So they could be sitting on committees, let's say a strategic policy committee in the local authority, and this is, if you like, their reference and their guide. Okay, and it sets out what it is that they're seeking to have achieved on behalf of all of the member groups. So it's being used where it's been developed by PPNs, it's been used in training for representatives, and it certainly strengthens the position of reps and their, you know, makes them more legitimate when they're sitting on these committees. It's much harder to dismiss them when they're carrying the weight of, you know, hundreds of agreed voices behind them. So they're not speaking for themselves, they're speaking for all of the wider membership, and that's very important. And I've said that the flip side, sorry, of that is that, you know, as an individual member group, that what it is that your reps are saying on your behalf. The next thing is that it forms the basis for the strategic and work plans. And essentially, those are there to try to assist the PPN to push to achieve the objectives that are set out in the vision. And it can help to identify core actions, it can help to prioritise actions. It's certainly been used to seek commitments from local election candidates, maybe to identify things that can be done between the PPN and other agencies that might help to get things done, or indeed between groups of members within a PPN working together. It might be flagging things, areas that members of the PPN want to develop more detailed policy on, and so on. So it's an extremely useful source from which other things flow, and it relates to all those three functions. Remember those three legs of the stool. What information is it that we want as member groups? What information is it we want to give back to agencies? What sort of supports, training, resources do we need that would help us to improve our capacity? How do we want to be consulted and represented? So in all of those ways, it helps to inform what the PPN is doing. It also then is a useful measure for change and for progress. So it's intended that the visions are kept under regular review, maybe every 4 to 5 years. And that will reveal whether issues that were clearly of concern that people wanted to see addressed in order to achieve the, the area to be as good as it could be, it'll become apparent whether or not there's been progress on those, whether they need to be, if you like, brought more to the fore and more work being done on them, or whether in fact new issues are arising. And so it's a very helpful gauge of how progress is being made and what change is actually happening. And then lastly, I think it's, and this is important, there is real evidence that's the support for the democratic process. Now, I know there's a big variation, both within PPNs and across the country, about the relationship between local councillors and PPNs. But where they come alongside the PPN and recognise how useful and ear to the community PPNs can be and how productively they can work together, then things can be very positive. And having agreed this shared vision, as I say, gives a hugely strong, legitimate voice for the community and voluntary sector, then the elected members are better able to make use of. And it's not that sometimes I think that the PPNs are seen as a challenge, but actually the elected members are still in the decision-making role primarily, and yet they can have a very constructive relationship where they can really find out, if you like, what it is that's concerning the community and voluntary sector, and learn from them and work with them. So it's a very powerful tool, and I think it's probably best that I leave it at that. Okay, thank you.